Hi, everyone. My name is Britt Duffy Adkins. I'm the founder of Celestial Citizen, and this is a talk that I recently gave at the AIAA Space Philosophy Gathering. And so I wanted to go ahead and record my presentation so that I could share it here on the Celestial Citizen YouTube channel so that anybody who's interested could tune in. So I'll get started. My talk was Resisting a Static Space Society, Designing for Adaptability and Transience. And a lot of you might already be pretty familiar with Celestial Citizen, but for anybody who's a newcomer, Celestial Citizen is a space urban planning platform for promoting a more equitable and just vision of life in the cosmos. And we seek, as an organization, to provide a medium for conversation around how to be a better interplanetary citizen and responsible steward of Earth. We do this through various media channels, but the easiest way to get acquainted with Celestial Citizen and learn what we're all about is through the Celestial Citizen podcast, which I host. This is available on iTunes, Spotify, and all other major streaming platforms. A little bit about myself. I have degrees in urban planning and architecture, but also space resources. So I'm particularly interested in the intersection of space exploration, urban planning, and social justice. Today, I plan to cover the following topics, which I hope will prompt some discussion on what future space exploration could be if it was not so tethered to existing norms. So I want to begin with an opening thought and something that Celestial Citizen holds very core to its mission. The dark void of space beckons to be filled with thoughts and dreams, not of one person or even a few, but with the enchanting cacophony of the collective Earth experience, which is hopefully a vision that many of us share, but it's not enough to just say it. We really need to act on it. And here is why I think we haven't reached that goal yet. So the problem at hand is that the status quo is still largely maintained over time. Now, obviously, we've made a great many strides since the image on the left was taken in the 1960s, but we still have a very long way to go. And the majority of humanity is still getting left out of shaping our future in space. And a lot of this has to do with racism, sexism, and ableism, among other discriminating behaviors that are still present in the space industry. Additionally, we as an industry need to do a better job of communicating the exciting and inspiring aspects of space to the broader population. Outside of those working in the field, there is still a sense of elitism and privilege that is preventing people from engaging when they might otherwise seek to do so. Additionally, we are repeating the same mistakes that we've made on this planet with colonialist and settler colonialist mentalities, which I will cover in more depth in a few slides. We are still placing too much emphasis on national agendas because we are concerned about preserving a foothold and a claim to new areas of space. And unless we look to dramatically shift the way that we have historically gone about doing things and engaging with space exploration, futures are still largely going to be constrained by present assumptions. Until we learn to break from the impulse to remain socially static, we will not find the progress we seek in becoming a spacefaring species. Some of what I worry might be preventing humanity from making that next great leap is its obsession with permanence, and that we are limiting ourselves by predominantly using normative expressions of exploration. We are, in my opinion, too comfortable looking to flawed, historic examples of Earth exploration to set the tone for what activities in space might look like. So when we consider the physical aspects of this specifically, we should ask ourselves how we should instead aspire to build with transience in mind. And what I mean by this is that physical design and infrastructure that emphasizes adaptability, reusability, in other words, such structures that can be recycled and repurposed to the greatest extent possible, would be optimal. Asking ourselves not only what design makes sense today, but what will preserve the most optionality for the future. Because as we know all too well on Earth, the cost of undoing anything on this planet is steep, and in space, it will be exorbitant. We also need to challenge our preconceived notions about space. And this is a question that was posed many decades ago by Gerard K. O'Neill. But does a superficial presence on the moon or Mars actually achieve desired outcomes, both from an efficiency standpoint, but also from a social standpoint. And I'm not necessarily saying that we should not ultimately pursue these objectives, but I am asking that we challenge the foundations on which we consider these to be the inevitable courses of action. So for a moment, I want to jump into the field of data science because I believe there are some interesting parallels. As data scientists know and often lament, garbage in, garbage out. In other words, our decision-making abilities for the future are only as good as the inputs or parameters that we begin with. And there is an incredible book that I highly recommend, which is Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. And I pulled this pretty intriguing and relevant quote from her book that states, one of the most important things to say about the gender data gap is that it is not generally malicious or even deliberate, quite the opposite. It is simply the product of a way of thinking that has been around for millennia and is therefore a kind of not thinking, a double not thinking even. Men go without saying and women don't get said at all. Because when we say human, on the whole, we mean man. I bring this up to say that one of the most dangerous things that we can do when attempting to vision out our space futures is to do so with not questioning that we might be building a future off of a faulty premise. And the best way to do that is to include as many people in the conversation as possible and make sure that diverse opinions and viewpoints are represented in the discussions where not only decisions, but also the underlying assumptions are being made. And I believe that one telling example of a failure to understand root causes of societal issues is with Simon Rameau's A Cure for Chaos. Although a very interesting mental exercise, this is a great example of how approaching social problems solely from a systems engineering approach ignores the complexity of the challenges at hand. One of the big mistakes that we made in urban planning during the second half of the 20th century was believing that we could engineer the chaos out of our urban centers. Ultimately, we came to understand that these methods oversimplified issues of social justice that were deeply intersectional and required proper inputs and context. And yet, I still see far too many conversations that gloss over many of these topics, despite the fact that they will inevitably pertain to space as well. And a lot of this seems to stem from colonialist and settler colonialist attitudes that are still, whether intentional or not, quite pervasive in the space industry. Lorenzo Veracini wrote a fantastic overview of settler colonialism, and I think that there are many points of comparison between examples of this concept taking place on Earth and the rhetoric around space exploration, because they revolve around a notion, whether stated or implicit, that securing a foothold in space is essential for national security and position. Mahmoud Mamani said that settlers are made by conquest, not just by immigration. And I believe it is important that we take a closer look at how many of our space endeavors are largely based in a normative expression and desire for conquest. Both colonialism and settler colonialism are likely to occur in space and are frankly already happening, so we will need to think about this more thoughtfully. And interestingly, although perhaps not surprisingly, settler colonialism can be harder to detect because the dominant feature of settler colonialism is not exploitation, but instead replacement. To start decolonizing our thought process, we need to realize that the idea of the settler should not be considered normative in space exploration. One of the urban planners that I have been rather inspired by throughout my career is Kevin Lynch, who wrote, among other titles, the book Good City Form. And he proposed that since an unstable ecology risks disaster as well as enrichment, flexibility is important, and also the ability to learn and adapt rapidly. Conflict, stress, and uncertainty are not excluded, nor are those very human emotions of hate and fear which accompany stress, but love and caring would certainly be there. I believe we cannot expect to be perfect. There is no utopia to be found on Earth or in space, but we can embrace flexibility, adaptability, and transience as pillars of how we think about humanity's future. It is our swiftness of response and our willingness to be accountable for mistakes that will determine more about our social future as a species than anything else. It is, of course, certainly easier to identify problems than to prescribe a solution. And I think it is important to state that the solution should not be defined by persons for whom the system has largely benefited. Instead, I bring this up as a discussion topic that I hope will prompt self-reflection in the field of space exploration, knowing that we have to do better, and perhaps the best next step we can take is to engage a more diverse group of people, especially underrepresented minorities that have not yet been heard on what the future of space exploration looks like from their perspective. And then building upon these hopefully broader and more inclusive conversations, we may begin to shape a radical and innovative new future of society. Thank you so much for listening. And of course, please reach out on social media, or you can reach out to me directly. I'd love to keep the conversation going.